Irina was questioned by the father of a six-month-old infant. "What guarantee can you give me of my baby's safety?" She responded, "I promise you nothing except that I'll risk my life today trying." Irina watched as Hanana held her baby tightly to herself. She saw the struggle going on in the mother's mind of what she was about to do. Irina reached out for the baby and put her hand on her chest. Breathing was shallow. The tranquilizer was working. She took the baby and her tears were welling up in her eyes, as well as Hanina's mother, the mother's eyes as well. She took the baby, laid the baby in a toolbox. She tucked the blankets around the toolbox and made sure the baby could still breathe. She closed the latch on the toolbox. Her and Henrik would have to work quickly to ensure that they would take this little baby out safely. They went out to their truck. Henrik got on the back, the flatbed, and he put the box amongst some other bricks and tools. Then she slid into the passenger seat. He'd acquired a pass to go in and out of the ghetto because he was a carpenter. As they were driving to the checkpoint where they would have to get across, nerves were very tight. There was silence in the truck. And then as they got close to the checkpoint, they noticed there was this long line, longer than usual. And Irina just groaned, thinking, "Oh no." But they realized that they were committed at this point and there was no turning back. As they waited, it seemed like forever. And finally, an officer came up, said to Henrik, "What have you got in the back?" Henrik started to stutter and stammer, and she thought, "Oh, we're not going to make it." Then he was ordered out of the truck. Henrik went back with the officer, and Irina could hear the footprints in the back of the truck and kicking this thing and opening flaps. And she waited. She waited. Then Henrik came back and slid into the passenger seat, and they drove through the checkpoint. They just got through the checkpoint and they stopped at a corner, and she looked at Henrik and said, "It would be safer for all of us if I leave now. Will you be all right from here?" He said, "Yes, I'm fine." From there, the little baby was taken to what was called an emergency take-in room, where little ones were really washed well. They were fed, and they were given medical attention, which often they needed because of starvation that they would have endured while they were in the ghetto. The year is 1940, and it's the Warsaw ghetto in Poland, where so many of the Jews had been herded from the city. They were herded into this area that had received the most damage during the beginning of the bombing of that city. And all the Jews were herded into this one particular area, and it was a walled part of the city. And it was very cramped. 6 up to 20 people lived in one room. The disease and the starvation was starting to take its toll. The small children were dying of typhus, and there was a vaccination that was existed, but they weren't always getting it. Except for Irina Sendler. She was a social worker, humanitarian, and a nurse who served in the Polish underground during World War II in German-occupied Warsaw. And from October 1943, she was the head of the children's section of the, I'm not going to say this right, Zagato, the Polish Council to Aid the Jews. She was about 30 years old when she started doing this work. She was a social worker for the city, and then whenever the Jews were ushered into this part of the city, she started to assist them in any way she can. She started by smuggling in food, smuggling in vaccine, smuggling in money when she could. She went to many different checkpoints all around the city at different times of the day because she didn't want to be detected. She was going in so. She was a social worker and was able to get access. There are nearly 500,000 weakening with starvation in that part of the city. Children would crawl through out of the ghetto into the Aryan side of the city in search of food. And many of those children would end up coming to Irina looking for a shelter. She had organized this whole network of people who were willing to take in a Jewish child in hiding until hopefully soon the war would be over. It's recorded that she assisted 2,500 children at that time. The children would come out hiding in trucks, in food trucks, in ambulances. The first child that she got out of the ghetto was in an ambulance because they supposedly were diagnosed with tuberculosis. Some of the diagnoses were true and some weren't, just to try to get the children out of the ghetto. Children came out hidden in buses. They would put them in bags underneath the seats early in the morning, and an officer would come on to maybe not check that bag under the seat, and another child would be brought out of the ghetto. When Irina brought this little 6-month-old baby out, the mother asked one thing. Well, they asked for her safety, but they also said, may this silver baby spoon go with her wherever she goes. So Irina had promised her, I will let you know when she's out safely, and I promise you the spoon will go with her wherever she goes. They had started putting them in the ghetto a couple of years before, but in July of 1942, the death camp Treblinka started taking Jews from the ghetto. And they were telling them they were going on this train to go to this destination because they needed to be cleaned up to go to a work camp. But on the platform of that camp at Treblinka, in both German and Polish, were these words: Jews of Warsaw, for your attention. You're in a transit camp from which you will be sent to a labor camp. As a safeguard against epidemics, you must immediately hand over your clothing in parcels for disinfection. Gold, silver, foreign currency, and jewelry must be placed with the cashier in exchange for a receipt. These will return to you at a later time upon presentation of the receipt. For bodily washing before continuing with the journey, all arrivals must attend the bathhouse. Then they started to play lively Yiddish music at the platform because it hid the noise of the dogs barking and some of the people screaming. How costly was it for the one? Giving Jew a piece of bread meant death at that time for both the giver and the receiver. Irina would literally go from door to door in the ghetto saying, if you give us your child, we'll take them out to safety. She was willing to pay with her life for one more child to leave the filth, the danger, disease, the starvation of that Jewish ghetto. The passage that Bob read to us this morning is 2 stories. And the stories that Jesus told of the value of finding one sinner who repents. As Bob read, we find Jesus in the company of tax collectors and sinners. Tax collectors were not well-liked people at the time. They were seen as instruments through which the subjection of the Jews to the Roman Empire was perpetuated. People viewed paying their taxes as an acknowledgement of the empire's sovereignty. And you and I know that if we had someone at the CRA at our door, we may not be the happiest to see them, because often that means trouble. And we may want to take it out on that person standing at the door. However, they're really not always the ones making the rules, but the sight of them can stir something up in us. And for these Pharisees and teachers of the law, the sight of these tax collectors was enough to stir them. And often they took more taxes than was required. And they were the willing tools of the oppressor of the time. When you spoke of a tax collector, you could use tax collector in the same sentence as you would harlot or a pagan. But Jesus was becoming an attraction to this group of people. Jesus was getting their attention. One might expect that this particular group of people would come harassing, mocking, or belittling Jesus, and yet we find they came. The cultural group were the very antithesis of the Pharisees, the teachers of the law. Charles Dickens wrote in The Tale of Two Cities, "It was the best of times. It was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief. It was the epoch of incredulity. It was the season of light. It was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope. It was the winter of despair. We had everything before us. We had nothing before us. We're all going direct to heaven. We're all going direct the other way." What opposites are in those few lines? All of them are opposites. And if the Pharisees could have read this, they would have said, we're definitely at the beginning and the tax collectors are at the end. We are the ones going direct to heaven. They, on the other hand, going the other way. That's what I'm sure the Pharisees would have viewed. The Pharisees were all consumed with keeping themselves clean and undefiled. Their life was centered around crossing, dotting every I, and making rule upon rule so that they could be pleasing to their God. Not only did they concern themselves with their own actions, but they were very careful with those who did not cross every T and dot every I. Now, can anyone tell me what this is? Poison ivy, yes. And for the life of me, I'll go through the woods and people say, poison ivy's there. How do you know it's poison? It's 3 leaves. Do you ever count how many plants in the forest have 3 leaves? I look and think, 3 leaves. There's lots of things down there that have 3 leaves. But for some people, they can recognize this very quickly. We have a really good friend who he acquired poison ivy a number of years ago. And now I think it's I don't know if he goes through a spring that he doesn't get it. If he's just in the area and he breathes it in, he doesn't have to touch it, he will have poison ivy. Just in the proximity. I think that's probably what the Pharisees thought about these tax collectors and sinners. Just to be in their company cannot be good news. Why is Jesus allowing them to be with him? And obviously, they mustn't have thought Jesus was saying the right things to them either. I mean, maybe if Jesus had been telling them off, maybe the Pharisees would have been happier. We don't know exactly what Jesus was saying at this time, but we do know that it was causing a lot of discomfort for those Pharisees. And this wasn't the first time. In Luke 5:29-32, then Levi held a great banquet for Jesus at his house, and a large crowd of tax collectors and others were eating with them. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law who belonged to their sect complained to his disciples, "Why do you eat and drink with tax collectors and sinners?" Jesus answered them. I like that. It says that they complained to the disciples, but Jesus responded for them. "It is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. I've not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance." For this particular setting, breaking bread together was even worse. The importance of meals for marking identity boundaries was especially important in ancient Palestine. You just didn't have anyone around your table. And yet Jesus is willing to allow the sinners, those tax collectors, to eat with them. So we first of all begin with the crowd that Jesus is with is so disturbing to those Pharisees. But Jesus never wastes a word or an opportunity. He always makes point upon point upon point. It's like building a house in the foundation. He lays brick upon brick upon brick. So he starts off his story by saying, suppose one of you has 100 sheep and loses one of them. Shepherding was a despised trade. During Bible times in the whole world, you'd find no occupation more despised than that of the shepherd, who all the days walked with a staff and a pouch. It was assumed that shepherds were robbers because they often took their sheep onto other people's properties. If you're going to graze your sheep, you take them over there where there's maybe better pasture, even if you don't own the land. When we first moved where we are, our neighbor came to us and he said, "If your dog ever chases my cattle, I'm going to shoot your dog." Nice to meet you too. And he was around our table. So Roger has said, since I blew it, Roger said, I should have said to him, if your cow ever comes on my property, it's in the freezer, because his cows have been on our property frequently. Somehow they get through the fence. But we don't see that as him robbing us. But for this time in history, whenever these sheep would be taken to other people's land and property, it was like they were robbing. It was taking from someone else what was not theirs. Of all people, it was thought the shepherds would not be able to repent or make restitution. So this opening question to the Pharisees would have sent their blood pressure even higher. First of all, he's with the wrong company. Now he wants to talk about sheep and shepherds, who the Pharisees would not have wanted to keep company with either. Jesus' opening question is more like a rhetorical question. He knew this would not be comfortable for them. Jesus was not really looking for an answer. He was just trying to make them think. Kind of like, is it like asking, is the rain wet? He wasn't really looking for them to answer. So Jesus is making his point yet again. Then he wants to hit another bruise, because his second story, he highlights a woman. And we know that for that time, a woman's testimony could never be trusted either, just like they believed the shepherds could not be trusted. But in Luke's gospel, we find he often pairs stories of men and women together. And for those of you who sat in Pastor Jeff's study on Acts, Luke also makes a great point of trying to bring up how accepting Jesus was of women of that day. When all the culture said, no, they have no place, keep them in the house, Jesus is welcoming them, he's traveling with them, he's allowing them to minister with him. And Luke in particular, in the Gospel of Luke and also in Acts, he seems to bring this out frequently. She is evidence of the value Jesus gave to women in a strong patriarchal society. Jesus' sensitivity toward women and the presence of the women among his disciples was something new, even surprising, and of major significance of the life of the early church and even today. But the heart of the Father is full of grace, acceptance, and favor. When the Pharisees could not see any further than what was wrong with the setting, what should not be done in this setting, and who you should not even be talking about, the Father's heart is revealed as grace, acceptance, and favor. Sometimes it's hard to realize that maybe I'm accepted for who I am, but there's some out there, and we can all think of probably some that, I really don't think they line up for the acceptance and favor part. They just don't deserve it. That has nowhere in the heart of the Father. That is nowhere in the thinking of the Son, because it abounds with grace, acceptance, and favor. Furthermore, the Pharisees and teachers of the law would have been very familiar with the language of the Old Testament. I have read, and I can't remember the exact, but they would have memorized so much of the Old Testament to be a Pharisee or a teacher of the law. They knew the Old Testament. Just want to read a few verses out of Ezekiel 34, verses 4 to 11. 2 to 11. Son of man, prophesy against the shepherds of Israel. Prophesy and say to them, this is what the sovereign Lord says. Woe to the shepherds of Israel, who only take care of themselves. Should not shepherds take care of the flock? You eat the curds, clothe yourselves with the wool, and slaughter the choice animals, but you do not take care of the flock. You have not strengthened the weak, or healed the sick, or bound up the injured. You have not brought back the strays, or searched for the lost. You have ruled them harshly and brutally. So they have scattered because there is no shepherd, and when they were scattered, they became food for all the wild animals. My sheep wandered over all the mountains and on every high hill. They were scattered over the whole earth, and no one searched or looked for them. Therefore, you shepherds, hear the word of the Lord. As surely as I live, declares the sovereign Lord, because my flock lacks a shepherd, and so has been plundered and because my shepherd did not search for my flock, but cared for themselves rather than my flock, therefore, O shepherds, hear the word of the Lord. This is what the sovereign Lord says. I am against the shepherds and will hold them accountable for my flock. I'll remove them from tending the flock so that the shepherds can no longer feed themselves. I will rescue my flock from their mouths, and it will no longer be food for them. For this is what the sovereign Lord says. I myself will search for my sheep and look after them. They could have heard this parable without having reference to the Old Testament, and that as being the shepherd, or God being the shepherd of his people. Often, Jesus' parables are taken from Old Testament to what was already been said in the Old Testament. Jesus has used the same format and puts them in a story form for them. So those Pharisees probably would have been thinking, oh, we're on to the shepherd story. And they might have been thinking, this is a story where the shepherds aren't doing a really great job. This is the story where they're allowing their sheep to be scattered all over the hillside. And yet, God says, you have not strengthened the weak or healed the sick or bound up the injured. You have not brought back the strays or searched for the lost. You have ruled them harshly. But, for this is what the sovereign Lord says, I look after them. He's not going to allow them to be totally lost and not cared for. And in verse 16, I will search for the lost and bring back the strays. I will bind up the injured and strengthen the weak. The Pharisees had pledged themselves to obey all the facets and the traditions to the minutest detail. They believed they were the only interpreters of God and his word. And they were also highly respected at the time by the masses of the Jewish people. After the destruction of Jerusalem in 586 BC, there was a need to interpret and apply the Torah in a whole new context. And these Pharisees and teachers of the law, that's what they did. They were there to bring the word, to bring the Torah, to make it alive to the people of that time. So they were very familiar with it. And yet this passage in Ezekiel highlights what a poor job some of the shepherds were doing in caring for the sheep. They weren't strengthened, but they were allowed to wander. They weren't sought after. They weren't looked for. And yet, in Jesus' story, we hear the very opposite. And it doesn't matter to Jesus where the location is. And it doesn't matter to Jesus who the people are. He's still looking. And he is diligently looking. We find in our parable that he leaves the 99. Now, to have 99 sheep of that day would probably mean there were some hirelings there as well. So it wasn't that the 99 was totally not cared for, but he went out looking for that lost sheep. We're told that if a sheep gets separated from are they called a flock or herd? Flock of sheep? Doesn't sound like it should be. If they get separated, they will get discouraged and they will just lay down. And if they lay on their back, they can't even get up on them by themselves. They will just stay there and give up and die. But Jesus goes looking for that lost one. And he finally comes to the place where he finds the one he's been looking for. And he doesn't say to the lamb, come, follow me. No. He gets down, he picks up the lamb, he puts him right on his shoulders. He's going to make sure the lamb gets safely home. That's the heart of the Father. To whosoever He's going to make sure it happens. And his heart never changes. He's always looking to and fro. I talked with Shannon this week, and maybe some of you know this part of her story. I had not been aware of it. Shannon Holmes, who attends here, she was baptized this spring. She said when she was searching for God, she was working at Starbucks. And these three women came into Starbucks, and they asked for a drink. And there was one drink that one particular lady said, "Oh, I don't think I'll get it here." She wanted to go somewhere else for this particular flavor of drink. So they went and sat down. And Shannon said, I thought to myself, I'm just going to make her that drink anyway. So she made her the drink and took it over and gave it to her, and she was really grateful. After a while, this woman comes over to Shannon. She says, I don't know where you're at, or I don't know who you are, but I really believe I'm to pray for you, because God wants you to know how much you're loved. Prays for Shannon on the spot. Comes back later, another day, and says, I'm really glad you're working today, because I believe I'm to give you my Bible. She lives in Pickering. She gives her Bible. Shannon still has the Bible. Shannon says the Bible's all marked up. And she stays in touch with Shannon still. Talk about searching. Talk about an Irina. Just to hear and then to obey, because really we are shepherds. We are the ones who represent the Lord. And you can say, well, I'm not a leader in that fashion, but wherever you are, you have a sphere of influence, and you're a shepherd there. Are we always keeping our eyes and our ears open for the lost one? Our woman in the story is also very diligent. She's lost one coin of 10 that she owns. But she wants that coin. We've all been there. You hide something, or you don't hide it. You place it somewhere in a safe place so you'll know where it's going to be. And then you forget the safe place, and you turn that room upside down. You know it's that room. I've even gone to the wrong room looking for whatever I've put safely away. Right? So she's she's lit a lamp. She's sweeping. She's doing whatever she can find to find the one. She has 9, but she wants that one as well. And then she finds it. And you know how relieved you are when you finally find it. Ha! Yes, you may tell someone else, but you don't call all your neighbors and friends and say, we are going to party. I finally found what I was looking for. But the heart of the Father does. It's worth celebrating, no matter who it is, because they were lost, but now they're found. In our story of the lost coin, it tells us that heaven is rejoicing. It's like God is looking down and saying, yes, yes, there's another one coming home. And is there really anything else more exciting than having another one coming home? At the end of the war, Elzbieta was adopted by the couple that hid her during the war. She says of herself, my birth certificate is a small silver spoon engraved with my name and birth date, a salvaged accessory of a salvaged child. What motivated these men and women to lay their lives on the line to rescue even one more? Irina was arrested in her own home before the war was over. She was living with her mom, who was quite elderly and had a heart condition, and an aunt had come to visit of Irina's, and a good friend of hers who also worked in the underground, helping place children. And Irina had gone through it many times. What if they come to my door? What do I do? Because she had written every child's name on a piece of cigarette roll, but their true names were. And she was trying to keep that for the end of the war. So she knew she was going to open the window and throw them out the window. And it was 3 a.m. when the rap started at the door. And she gets up and she goes to do her plan, which she'd rehearsed so often. She looks out, and the SS are standing looking up at her from her window. And all she can think of is, I've got to get these papers somewhere for the safety of all those children. So she grabs them and her friend's there and she says, hide these. They probably won't take you. So her friend hides them in her bra. The men come in and for 3 hours they ransacked their apartment. They lifted boards off the floor. They tore this oven apart. They were looking for anything they could find to hold against Irina. They found nothing, and Irina managed to convince them that, Mom was too sick. What could she do? And she managed somehow to convince the other two women were visiting from out of town, and actually the one woman lived quite close to where she was that had all this paper stuffed. But thankfully, Irina kept thinking to herself, they didn't question her. And they just kept bombarding Irina with questions. They finally took her out of the apartment, and in the car they headed down to the prison. As they're driving there, Irina put her hands in her pocket and she felt one of the pieces of paper. And she thought, I've got to do something with that paper. I don't want them to find that one on the paper. So she looked at the man beside her who was dozing a bit, and she managed to try to crinkle it a bit in her hand, in her pocket. And then when she felt he was a little more dozy, she managed to throw it out the window. She gets there and she apparently never told anyone of that first beating and what it was like, because she refused to give any information. And she kept telling herself, I can endure anything to keep those children safe. She was taken to prison, and every day there'd be a different name called, or names that would go to be questioned and probably tortured. And her heart would just be sinking that her name wouldn't be called again. And she also met some of her friends and co-conspirators there in the prison, and they all tried to encourage one another, we will keep quiet. They broke her legs and they broke her ankles, and then they had her stand doing laundry with those limbs that were so bruised and hurt. She was paid for to get released. She thought she was going to execution, and the officer said the execution was the left. He said, go out that door. She said, I can't walk. He punched her in the face and said, get out of here. What would cause someone to go through all of that for those children? For one, it's a brave heart. For one, she's in her 30s. I keep thinking, maybe if I was younger. But that's probably no excuse either. We have, whenever they first took the Jews into the ghetto, she wore a band on her arm with the gold star in solidarity with the Jews, even though she wasn't a Jew. We have around us everyday people who we probably know where their destiny is. We probably know what eternity will look like for them. And I don't know, I kept asking myself, Lord, what is it you need to do in this heart to stir up more about compassion like the Father's heart? What is it, Lord, that you want to do in this heart? Now, I'm not saying we will probably all maybe do acts like Irina would do, because I'm sure she was a particular personality type that could forge ahead in some of these situations. But I am positive that God probably wants to lay in all of our hearts more of a burden for the one more, for the lost one, wherever they are. And if I can understand the Father's heart, I can probably have a greater appreciation of what my heart should be looking like. The parable does not tell us how to search for the lost, but I think it tells us enough that we should be searching for the lost. Jesus did not condone sin. He may have left them in their sin, but he communicated no disdain for the sinners themselves. Whatever we do, initiating grace and acceptance of God displayed by Jesus must be evident in all we do. These parables challenge us of where our hearts may be and where we truly find joy. It was fabulous to see the 2 women baptized here not so long ago. And what joy that is to share in that. And a community absence of joy is really a community absent of the kingdom of God. So not only should we have the heart for the lost as Jesus had, but there's really no greater joy than knowing one more is saved. One more eternity has been changed. Irina lived to be, I think it was 98. I think to myself, all that she went through and all that she endured, and she lived to that age. It said in the particular book that I read, she became very religious towards the end of her life. I'm not sure what that meant, because I'm not sure where the author would classify being religious would be. But for you and I, we can start afresh in saying, Lord, help me to have your heart. This is what your heart looks like, so help me to have your heart. And help me to know the joy of having one more coming home and knowing him as his Savior. Lord, we bless your name. We thank you, Father, for the wonderful display of your grace, acceptance, and favor. Lord, there are many ones around us. And Lord, you alone know how you would have each one of us respond to the one. But Lord, I'm asking for myself and for those who are here this morning, help us to have your heart. A heart that doesn't come judging, a heart that comes accepting. A heart that doesn't come with criteria, but a heart that comes knowing your great love for them. So Lord, may we walk as you displayed in these parables of people who are looking for the one and who rejoice of one more coming to know you. We give you the praise and glory in Jesus' name. Amen.